This is Moments of Truth, a webcast with and for customer success professionals. I'm your host, Andrew Marks, co-founder of Success Hacker. Today, I am joined by Guy Galon, VP of Customer Success at Hysolate, responsible for the entire post-sales activity, including support, onboarding, value-driven activities, renewals, and upsells. Hysolate enables organizations to isolate risky and sensitive activities on users' endpoints with a local workspace that isolates applications and data. With Hysolate, you can split the user's device into two isolated environments so users can work freely and be productive without compromising security. Guy has been in customer-facing roles for 20 years. Customer management and building relationships is his real passion. He considers himself a multidisciplined customer success leader and has had the privilege of working for organizations in different stages of their life cycle. He's managed mature CS teams, as well as built CS organizations from the ground up in small startups. Guy, welcome to the program, and thanks for making time for me today.
Thanks for having me, Andrew. I'm excited to be here.
Of course. Glad that you're here. Guy, there are a couple of things that I wanted to talk with you today about being predictive and then finding the right people for customer success roles. And I know they sound like two pretty distinct discussions, but I think they're very related. Well, one important aspect of being good at customer success is both knowing and sensing where your customer is at. We need to consider both objective data points as well as subjective analysis so that we can more accurately predict where we expect them to be going. You're never going to be 100% right, but we can at least mitigate the risk of a missed impression or opportunity if we're doing the right things, looking at the right data, and having the right conversations. So let's start out with that. What are your thoughts on customer success being more predictive?
So let me start by saying that I see the prediction can be applied for the customer management side, also, as you mentioned, on recruiting and the CSM side of things. But let's start with customers. And I believe, as we mature, customer success matures, we get more and more data analytics, we get more numbers, artificial intelligence. There are so many things that we rely on computers, but eventually we are humans, and the customer success role is to deal with people. And until we hear differently from the future, we will definitely need to apply some very important soft skills in people's skills to manage our customers and manage relationship. So that's my underlying assumption. So I see prediction helping us with three important things. One, to reduce an inherent knowledge gap that we have between vendor and a customer. We'll never know exactly what happens behind the scene. This is one. Second is to mitigate risk. You mentioned it as well. There are always risks that we have to manage. And if we follow those two principles, then we have better chances to retain customers. If we think about possible future outcomes, my assumption is that it will influence the way we act in the future and have potentially a positive impact. So that's my approach. Specifically, I can see prediction being applied in a few examples or few scenarios. I like to talk about four major ones. One is when a stakeholder change role and how you predict that. When you need to spot your next executive sponsor or your next champion in the organization, there's a way to predict that as well, and it's not coming from numbers. Predicting renewal. I think every CSM is expected at some stage, regardless of usage or other metrics. They are being asked about their understanding or their prediction about renewal. And the other one that at least I suffered from it in the past, predicting if your customer is actually experiencing or trialing a competitor's product or competitor's service, which is usually a huge alarm indicating about your upcoming renewal.
Which plays back to the mitigating risk. Now, let's make sure we're clear about this for the people who are listening. We're not talking about forecasting. I mean, we can leverage some of these predictive tools that you're going to talk about to help us feel better maybe about a forecast or to make a forecast. But these are two different things we're talking about.
Correct. Forecasting, from my perspective, is using the data analytics, any numbers that we crunch into computers, and then they do their magic, applying artificial intelligence or machine learning, helping us to segment customers, to think about how they will be using the product. That's based on numbers and statistics. That's forecasting. Still an important part of customer success.
Yeah, for sure.
The prediction is when you need to take a decision or make it a certain decision based on the fact that you don't have sufficient information, right? And this is then on you as a CSM or as a person, right? To try and bridge that knowledge gap. And then when you have certain, I call it a puzzle or a jigsaw, you kind of collect all those pieces of information slowly and you have a picture. Maybe it's not a full picture. And then based on that, hopefully a future picture, you can take a decision. But
at least you got something. You got something to start
exactly.
with. So let's talk. So what was the first one on your list? The stakeholder leaving, or no?
Yes. Actually, when the stakeholder, I call it stakeholder change, but it's actually stakeholder leaving. He or she may leave the company, or they just move to a different role.
Right.
And the three pieces of advice that I based on my experience is, first, this person will definitely slow down their engagement. So if you're used to getting an email response on time, this stakeholder joining calls on time, responding to all your questions, suddenly he or she will be slowing down. The second aspect, or the second signal, is when somebody else that hasn't been formally introduced will start joining calls, copied on emails, maybe ask you some questions that this customer already knows about, and he or she will try to get themselves engaged. So if you couple those two signals together, you may have an indication for someone who is a stakeholder leaving. And the third one is more of proactively, as a CSM, trying to ask the right questions or sense the answers that you get. So you may hear things like, nobody has time to read your report. The person that, this Mr. X that has been your stakeholder is now responsible for a different team or has other things to do. And if you take those all things together, assuming that they are not announcing anything, and sometimes it happens because they don't always announce, you better trigger your stakeholder change playbook well in advance.
Yeah, no, that's a great suggestion. So now we got to let's be clear here, though. Slowing down engagement, there are other reasons that could cause that. So we shouldn't jump immediately to that conclusion. If you, for example, have a customer that is their business fluctuates based on seasons. Let's say they're in retail, and they slow down engaging with you between Thanksgiving and New Year's. Well, there's probably a very good reason why that's happening. It's called the holidays, right? But I love these kind of signals, because if somebody else starts joining the call, one of the first things that I always did was, what I wouldn't know who this person was, I'd hop right on LinkedIn. And I'd figure out, okay, who is this person, right? Do they sit within the organization? So that's because that right there could tell you, hey, you know what? This is a senior person that's working underneath this stakeholder. And, so between a slowdown in engagement and understanding that may lead you to conclude, hey, you know what? There may be a move happening here.
Yeah. And the good thing is that you have like two signals, and then you have to use your own, as I said, your skills,
ask the right questions,
your proactive questioning. Try to gauge, if this is just someone slowing down or somebody else joining the team. It's not necessarily a stakeholder change, but if you combine all the signals together, and remember, we said prediction is not 100%. It may be wrong, by the way. But you prefer that you make a wrong prediction and you trigger something internally, but rather than the other way around.
Exactly. Better than sitting around just on your thumbs in a reactive mode, right?
Correct.
Okay, awesome. I love that. Those three great points there to think about. So the next one was a new stakeholder.
A sponsor joining, or your next new sponsor, new executive sponsor.
Yeah.
So here again, I would split it to two. You have like two signals that I'm looking for. First one will be you're used to work with this customer, with the team, with those people, and if they need something, they know exactly what they need. If they need a new report or they have any questions, they know exactly what to ask. And if you have questions, they know how to answer. And suddenly you will hear statements like, we need to consult with someone else. So maybe you are going to offer them to try a new feature or a new report, and then suddenly you will hear things like, you know what, there's somebody else that we need to get his or her opinion on. So that will be one signal. The second signal will be you hear statements like there is a new chief in town, new exec, new head of joining. And those two signals are not enough, by the way. This is just things that you need to listen to. And
Right.
then there are two things that you need to proactively do. One, you need to ask who this person is, what they are responsible for, right? They could be responsible for the same business unit which you are serving with your product, or they could just be somebody else that just consumes some of the deliverables that you provide.
Right.
And then you need to ask yourself, do they know me? Okay, let's say that they're responsible for your product or for the business unit. Do they know me personally? Do they know my product? Do they know my company? Do they know any of my colleagues? And if this is not happening, and they don't, maybe this new stakeholder is bringing somebody else, a new vendor with him to the table. Yeah. Take all those things together, and you may, and from my perspective, the trigger to action is get an introduction call and make sure you introduce yourself and your product before somebody else is asking the questions.
Well, I think it's important to, so these are great. Do they know us? By the way, once again, LinkedIn, always a interesting, almost a detective tool, right? Especially when you can look that person up and you start looking at their connections. It's not good enough just to look who they are. You start looking at their connections and you say, hey, you know what? They've got links to the account executive, customer success individual, and the VP of professional services at our biggest competitor. Ooh, so that's a big warning sign for me, right?
And I had that with one of my customers 2 years back.
Yeah,
I already knew who he was bringing with him as a preferred vendor.
Right.
So I had to prepare for my introduction call to explain why my company, why I worked for, why I was better than them in certain aspects that I knew we were better than them.
Well, and that takes me to my point being it's so important that you've done a good job delivering the value, demonstrating the value, and making sure that the value that you have brought to the table has been disseminated across the organization, so that this new stakeholder, you're basically saying, hey, by the way, a part of your competitive advantage is the way that you're using our product, and here's the value that's been created, and this individual and this individual and this individual can attest to that, right? You want to put yourself in the best possible position to be able to fight off what potentially could be a competitor coming in.
And the most important thing is start it as early as possible, and this is why it's so important to predict, because if you start it when they already settled and you have 1 or 2 months to renewal and they already brought their preferred vendor, most chances it's too late.
It's too late, exactly. But once again, there's never you can never be 100% predictive on your forecasts or what have you. But if you are delivering the value and you're disseminating that to the right people, and positioning yourselves as part of what makes the organization as competitive as possible, it makes it a lot harder to dislodge you. You create stickiness, especially when you're able to tie what you bring to the table into broader corporate objectives. Okay, so we've got the new stakeholder, and then number 3 was what?
The renewal. Which is something that, maybe if the first 2 while I still think that any CSM should be worried about that or be alerted to that, renewal goes without saying.
Yes.
But still, I kind of structured 5 signals or 5 areas that I think are good or indicative of renewal. The first one is to what extent your customer knows your roadmap, interested in your roadmap, hooked, or there is a kind of good correlation between what they do and your roadmap. Have they raised any feature request? Did you have any meeting between your product team at least once or twice this year and the customer to lay out the plans for next year? So that's one. And if that doesn't exist, I'm not saying that they will not be renewing, but this is the first signal.
Right.
Second signal, and again, this is just based on my experience with many customers. Did you hear the term partnership? Did the customer ask you, let's make this engagement partnership? You are preferred vendor. You are a vendor of choice. If you hear that coupled with good interest in the roadmap, then you have good chances that this customer will be retained and keep doing business with you. I always like to say that I heard the partnership statement sometimes from procurement before renewal, and then I know that they want to get additional discount.
Right.
But that's a side story. The third aspect, and this is where actually we do need forecasting or we need the numbers, this is the usage. So I would not be able to make a good prediction about renewal without actually knowing how the customer uses my product, how many users, if I sell a number of licenses, if it's based on different feature usage or whatever. But I still need to understand this is another signal that has to go into my thought process. The fourth one will be the sentiment, and sentiment you can gather from surveys, you can gather from discussions, calls, meetings, Slack messages, informal discussions, phone calls. All of that, a good CSM should be able to gauge the sentiment of the customer. And the fifth one, which by the way, sometimes overlooked, is the environmental changes. And the last few years taught us that you can be a great vendor, you can provide a great service, it can be used, but the product can be used very, very heavily used. But there are certain changes that if you are not following them, such as COVID, such as geopolitical crisis in Ukraine, such as changes in regulation, industry regulation, local regulations, if those happening and you as a CSM, you're not aware of that, and the fact that some changes will happen to the customer requirements, then you may still have a risk of your renewal. So these are the 5 signals that I'm looking for when I'm trying to predict renewal.
I love that roadmap knowledge by the customer plus using the term partnership is a good chance for renewal. Yeah, they usually don't talk that way or show the interest in the product roadmap unless they're planning to renew.
And sometimes, by the way, I saw interest in roadmap, but they didn't mention partnership. But then if you know your customer, you can offer partnership. Be my beta tester.
Yeah, exactly.
Let you test some of my features, and if they really respond positively, then you just made them partners.
Yeah, yeah. The usage statistics and the sentiment surveys, it's NPS and all that stuff is not that surprising. I love that you brought up the environmental changes. We can't. It's one of the things. So many years ago, somebody came out with a predictive customer success tool, and I kind of scoffed at it I kind of laughed at it because, predictive analytics within a closed system. Yeah, that's got, as a matter of fact, I helped start a company that built that very thing, right? But you have a very well-defined boundaries, right?
Boundaries, right.
Right. And we know that it was a big data analytics tool for high value assets. So in this case, oil rigs. And we knew what the boundaries were for the different sensors for this oil rig, and we could, make adjustments based on environmental factors as far as, if you're in the desert, you're going to have this much dust and it's going to be this hot, likely it's going to be this range. Or if you're in the ocean, you're going to have there are certain things though that we could lock in. But when you're talking about, environmental changes, geopolitical changes, the pandemic was a great example, right? Things could be going like gangbusters. And if you ignore those things and ignore the connection that those environmental changes have to your customer's business, you're doing it at your own peril.
Correct. And these are let's say, the most difficult, let's say, changes that we've seen lately, but it could also be kind of a more minor change that you just overlooked. As I said, regulation, a fierce competitive environment. Your customer is now competing in a much more competitive environment than last year. Yeah. So they need to be, maybe they need faster time to market. They need features much more quickly. If you don't understand that or predict that, you have a problem.
Well, this is why it's important. You need to be aware of not just your customer, but the world that they play in.
Exactly.
Right?
But this is what we expect CSMs to be. Exactly. Proactive, interested in what's happening, not just in front of them, but what happens behind the scene. Yeah,
exactly. Exactly. Those are what I like to refer to as those strategic conversations, that kind of more strategic thinking. We're always looking at figuring out ways to streamline success and to provide success managers with the help, even like RPA or AI, some sort of help for those repetitive tasks, so that it frees up their time to do that sort of stuff, to think that way, to do the analysis, right? So that you can make accurate predictions, and therefore drive more accuracy with your forecasts and what you're basically the expectations that you're setting with your management. Now, so that was number 3. There was another one. Next one was what? We talked about renewal.
How you predict the fact that your customer is trialing competitors' products, right? Which is not easy to predict, I have to say. But still, I have my own framework, and I'm always happy to share it.
Okay.
So, the first 2 signals that you should be looking for. First one is customer will start asking questions about, let's say, missing features, missing roadmap features, things that they know that don't exist, or maybe they asked about it before, but still that those questions come up again. I had this example of a customer that asked me about certain, at the time I was working for a cybersecurity company. There was a Facebook search using Facebook API, and Facebook limited the API usage. And we had to find a different solution, and we didn't have that immediately. So this customer knew about it, but he still was asking me about it. He was asking me about
asking you out of the blue. Hey, by the way, what happened to this thing?
Exactly. When he knew that I told him that we would give them an update, and retrospectively, because eventually they left us, he was working with one of our competitors who told them that he has Facebook search. Of course, it was kind of an illegal or semi-illegal solution, but who cares? And that was a warning sign, or for me, it's a warning sign. So this is one. And the second one is suddenly they ask you questions about features that they don't use. They exist in your product. You know what the use case is. You know how they use the product. Maybe the requirements change, maybe. But sometimes they ask that because they do an evaluation with another product, and they do like a feature set comparison. So suddenly they ask about things that they haven't used before. So again, those 2 kind of signals, each one on its own, it's fine. It could happen. Customers ask questions. We want them to ask questions. Just be alerted that if those come very close together, and those 2 type of questions come together, then you may have a problem. This may be indicative of, but that's not just those 2 signals. So third signals from my perspective, and it is tied to the first scenario that we talked about, stakeholder change. New stakeholder, new requirements, new scope. Sometimes they bring the other vendors. So if this is happening while a stakeholder changed, and even if you predicted or you worked towards getting to know the stakeholder, but you know that this stakeholder worked before with one of your competitors, then there is a good prediction here to make about what they are doing behind the scene. And the fourth signal, and again, this is where we need to be more proactive. If you deliver a good service, a good product, you help those teams on the customer side to be successful, especially the technical ones, the operation teams. They will not feel comfortable about it. They will not feel comfortable that you are doing a very good job and then somebody's looking to replace you behind the scene. So if you or your team who work with those technical and operational teams, if you have good relationship, you may hear things like, we've been asked to check this technology.
Pick up the phone and do a little back channel checking, right? Yeah. And
they will give you some signals that things are not going necessarily even how they want it, because they like you. You're helping them to make their job very, very effective or very successful. So why change? And if somebody's if a different manager is asking them to do that, again, based on my experience, and I managed to use those predictions by exactly talking to those people. And this is also why it's important to have different level of relationships. It's not just about executive stakeholder relationship. Make sure you have also the operational team or the technical team on your side.
You need to have contacts up and down the management chain. Yeah, because once again, if you're delivering, you've delivered value, and you've deployed the value, delivered the value, you've disseminated that, people understand the value that you've brought, and you've done a good job stakeholder mapping, getting people from the key stakeholders all the way down, then you can, and if you've done a good job establishing those relationships, you actually can find yourself in the position where either they're coming directly to you and saying, hey, you might have a problem here.
That's the best.
That's the best situation, right? Or picking up the phone and calling them. And this is one of those things that you don't want to necessarily do via email, because you don't want them to feel threatened. But you pick up the phone and call them and say, here's what I think is going on. Can you give me some insight? Only
by phone, or never do it by email, because nobody wants to respond to that email.
Not at all. They'll be like, I don't know what you're talking about, right? But hopefully you've built those relationships where you can pick the phone and call them, and then maybe what they can do is put you in a much better position to be able to position your solution to stick around, to be retained. And then, I like the ask questions about features they don't use. Another thing that you can be doing with that is so tell me how you're going to use it. Tell me why you're right. So you get into that kind of 5 whys thing where you're trying to peel back the onion, and I'm just asking innocent, open-ended questions.
So right? It can happen, but I can give you some example of I call it when questions bounce back, and then depending on the answer. So sometimes it's a genuine question and with a genuine answer. Sometimes they will say, you know what, somebody from another team just asked me about this feature. Why? We have an internal audit. I heard those stories about internal audit. We need to document something. We need to prepare documentation. Sometimes these are, made up stories. Sometimes it could be true, but this is why you always have few signals that you need to look for.
Yeah, well, but if it's a made up story, I mean, you're going to be able to, if they ask you a vague question about features they don't use, and then you ask a probing question to better understand how they would use it and give you a vague answer, I would think that would be a signal in itself.
Yes, that's true.
So, okay, that's awesome. And was there a fifth one, or was that?
No, these are the main four. I can, I had the main four that because they need to be related to how CSMs do their job. All of them relate to either stakeholder management, the essence of customer success, which is renewal, and the fourth one is, of course, related to all of that as well.
And those are awesome. Those are awesome, and those are awesome. I love the signals and the way you laid that out. Now, with all that being said, though, how do you use those predictive skills to recruit and groom the right customer success managers in today's world?
So yeah, that's kind of a thing that just happened in the last year. I think we always think about customers' journey, about customers, and then I figured out, oh, wait a minute, we also have CSM journey, right?
Right.
We recruit them, we onboard them, we engage them, they're part of our team, and hopefully they won't be churning, right? If they do a good job, we want them to stay. So but at the same time, the landscape today is that, first of all, customer success is relatively new profession. So we don't have people who have been 20 years customer success. There are people that did 20 years of customer management in different roles, but not necessarily B2B SaaS customer success. So we need to be realistic. So it means that we have good people out there. We just need to predict if they will be doing a good job as CSM. So I think in the industry today, there's a kind of common understanding that you need to be proactive. You need to have some kind of experience as in customer service. It doesn't have to be tech customer service, but some kind of the ability to be able to hear customers and know how to respond. Empathy.
Empathy's huge.
Empathy, yeah, exactly. Being structured in your thinking process, being able to communicate. So those things, I think, most CS leaders, when they interview, I'm sure you heard it yourself, I think these are the basics. And then
yes.
You ask yourself, what else do I need? And this is where I kind of built a certain framework for myself. And you've been in that session. I shared it a few weeks back. I don't believe we can find a CSM that can do everything. No. We need to find those areas of expertise that if one of the two of, I have four, at least in my teams, but if I have a candidate that has one or two of them, then I can predict quite confidently that he or she will be doing a good job. And if you're interested, I can share those four different domains as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's, once again, to your point, it's very, it's going to be very specific to your particular organization. Like you said, there's the table stakes, right? The empathy and the communication and the
customer
proactiveness, customer facing, all that stuff. Those are table stakes. I get that. So what's the model? What's the framework that you've built?
So I looked at, and this is just not this existing organization. This is a few years back as well. I categorized, or I split the CSM role to four main categories. One is what I call the project management style. Second one is the domain expert or trusted advisor style. Third one will be the negotiation, the negotiation skills and knowing how to do difficult discussions. And the fourth one is the data analytics style. Rarely you will find a person that has all four of them, and he or she are excellent in all four of them. If that was the case, then we'll probably be all very happy worldwide. So the idea here is to predict if this person can be a good CSM based on what kind of expertise he or she already possess. If they possess none of these, I can confidently predict that they will not be a good CSM, or it will just take a long time, maybe even more than a year, to get them up to speed. But if they come from a project management background, they know how to manage customer, they know how to scope, they know how to prioritize, they know how to manage risks, that's fine. Then I can help them to know how to manage, to run difficult discussions, which probably they already know, because if they ran a project that was late or over budget, they should be knowing how to do. Exactly, exactly.
I love that. That's great. I mean, and honestly, that's a pretty generic framework that can be applied across the board. To your point, your project management, you got to be well organized. You got to be able to scope. You got to be able to have difficult conversations. You got to know. You got to be able to identify and manage risk and remediate it. Of course, domain expert. goes without saying, if you can show up as a domain expert, and you're able to talk the talk, and that will help you communicate really well with your customers. Hey, this person knows what they're talking about, so it's going to be able to open up channels of communication. The negotiation skills, 100% agree with you. And when I think of negotiation skills, I'm not just thinking about negotiation skills from the concept of negotiating a contract. You're constantly negotiating with customers. You're negotiating scope. You're negotiating the size of this
timelines,
training, the timelines, and right. So it's how do you give and take, but that's where the empathy and the active listening and all these other things come in, so you can frame conversations correctly and use anchors and things like that. And then the data analytics piece. You just got to be able to figure it out, right? You don't have to be you don't have to be a data scientist, but you need to be comfortable taking data, manipulating it, throwing it into a pivot table, looking at data in different ways. It doesn't mean that even even if it's just for your book of business, right? To figure out how do I prioritize.
Exactly. And the data analytics side, the interesting thing here, it could be someone who is very technical, likes to run reports, create dashboards, digest different data. But most CSMs may not have those skills, but still, as you said, they have to be able to read and make conclusions and be able to not being afraid from data, because in the way we are approaching today's technology, they will have to. And if they don't, then eventually, as we move along, they will not be able to keep up.
Yeah, exactly. They won't. And once again, you don't have to be a data scientist, but you can't be afraid of it. You can have a data scientist crunch all the numbers. You should be able to at least be able to talk about it, right? Understand it at least to a cursory level. That's why we have
present it. And present to a customer.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Present to a
internally,
customer,
externally.
Present externally, present internally as well. Right.
Correct. Exactly.
That's the best. The best thing that we can do, whether we're trying to make a case with a customer, the value that's being created, whether we're trying to make a case with our a product team as to why we should implement a new feature or fix a problem. Is to pull the emotion out of it and be able to present facts, be able to present data, hard numbers, right?
And this is why this specific category is so important when you think about collaboration, being influential in your own environment internally, being able to talk to engineering, to, as you mentioned, product, even marketing, pre-sale. All the numbers eventually will. Substantiating your statements with numbers makes the discussions much more productive and as I said, collaborative as well.
Awesome, Guy. This is great. This is a fantastic. I really love this topic. I really enjoyed our conversation. I am sure that our listeners are gonna love it. They're gonna love the suggestions. They're gonna love the way you've laid out this framework for predicting customer success managers and their success themselves. So thank you again for your time, and appreciate you being on the show. And hopefully we'll see you here again. Yeah,
it was my pleasure, and I will be happy to come back again, Andrew. Thanks very much.